We'll call the special board meeting on Monday, July the 27th, 2020 at 9 a.m. at the county board room in the historic courthouse to order. What we were talking about today is we're going to have further discussion of a discussion that we had last Tuesday on the Federal CARES Act dollars, on how the county board is going to distribute or spend that money, if that's what we're going to do. And we're going to have that discussion today. So, Mr. Houle, are you leading the charge on this?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know about leading the charge, but we're here today to talk about exactly what you just said. I thought maybe we could start out on broadband again, just like we did the last time. I think CTC has some revised proposals that they want to share with you.
Oh, great.
So, Christy, if you want to take it away and let us know how you have refined the proposals since last week.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you to the county commissioners and to you, the chair. I appreciate the time that you're giving us to talk about the broadband part of the CARES Act funding. Over the past week, or since we've met last, we have spent a considerable amount of time really making sure that every expense that we're bringing forward and every project that we're bringing forward will be able to pass the audit in the way that we know about it. We have reached out to the Federal Communications Commission and to national agencies to make sure that how we're looking at the broadband piece of this is going to be acceptable in the audit. And so what I've brought back to you today is a revised budget and summary of projects that we can complete by December 1st. We have located the equipment and the contractors to be able to ensure that this work is done by the 1st of December. And the second piece of this is the true up of the drops that were laid from March to May that were COVID based drops for telemedicine, distance learning, or telework. And so, Therese, do you have the summary of the projects up for them?
Which one do you want, Christy?
Yep, that one, the 7/23/2020. Yep.
This one?
Yes.
Okay.
So we knew that our ask was far too large in the first round, first go around, and that the target needed to be closer to 1.5 million. And so what we've done is we've put together what we believe, again, will pass the audit, but also that makes sense in the budget. The Wi-Fi access point at $3,875. We've dropped this expense with CTC taking on more of the expense in this area and reducing the overall ask in the CARES money. The COVID-related drops we've left at the $209,930. What we are doing right now is contacting every one of those customers. We've started this process already, contacting each one of them to have them answer a survey of if drop or internet was connected or based on COVID-19 or one of those related topics. And so we'll be able to have the survey on each location that we'll be able to provide for the audit county. If for any reason they were not related to that, we will have that information before September 15th, deliver that amount of money and make sure that the county understands that we weren't for that purpose, and so that the county would then have time to reallocate if there's any funds out of that budget, so that we don't have money out there that isn't getting used. And so we will stay on a tight timeline of getting all that information back. The Borden Lake project, we have reduced, we've gotten it down to the Garrison Town Hall and the Bay Lake Town Hall, along with doing 172 total passings. This is 221 less passings that he is committed to serving into the future, but they would be based on a 2021 build out. PC's commitment is that we would then finish the rest of that project going into 2021. And then Camp Vanasek has remained the same, except that the price of product for contractors continues to go up, and so we trued up what we believe the actual product costs are going to be to the 465,980, with a total proposal of $1,259,445. And that is all I have, Administrator Hool.
Questions?
Chair Cory.
Forest View and Lake Edward have been dropped.
So Christie, Commissioner Franzine is asking about the County Road 13 area.
Yep, we dropped those out because we didn't feel that they were, as you could see in the model, they weren't the most cost-effective projects, and they also were projects would be very difficult to complete in the December 1 timeframe.
I think the County Road 13 one had a broader area. Christie, what if it was running just right down County Road 13 to connect to the Lake Edward Town Hall?
Steve, can you jump in on that? Our engineer is on here.
Yeah, we never looked at that specifically. Certainly, if we were to pull the broader scope of that project out and narrow it in, it would reduce the cost significantly. Could we? I mean, I can certainly run the numbers and see what it would take to just get to the Lake Edward Town Hall and put the costs to that. It would be at this point in time. I mean, it doesn't seem late in the season, but for us, it is with materials and contract availability. So for me to say that we could 100% get that done, it'd be pretty tough. But I can certainly put those numbers together and get those in front of you guys.
I would appreciate that, thank you.
Yeah, I think we'd at least like to see what those numbers look like, just to run straight down the county road to connect to the Lake Edward Town Hall.
Okay, I'll take a look at that.
Mr. Hool, I think that we'd also need to look at, and if we're looking at broadband, I think we have to look at the total county. So really anything north of Pequot, Breezy Point, going across that, we're really servicing that north half of the county as well. So I think whoever the service providers are, those areas, we're going to have in contact with and see what their kind of costs would be.
Okay. Do you have any particular or underserved areas that you'd like us to focus on?
Well, I think, from the contacting the school districts to find out, I think that, part of that is in regards to not only the businesses, but education.
Okay.
I think the other part would be is also incorporating who other providers or service providers. I know that in some discussion with Kichigami in regards to the regional library system, they've talked a little bit about investing in broadband. So I think making sure that we know that what other partners might be investing into the broadband service.
Yeah, our problem I'm sorry.
The only thing is we're really here today. Well, we're not going to make the decision until tomorrow,
Right.
but we're tentatively making a decision today because this is a time-sensitive deal, Bill. If Christie's going to be able to get this done, we got to let them know tomorrow,
Right.
and then they got to hit the ground and start plowing in cable and whatever they have to do. So I guess I don't quite know what you're asking for us to do. I think we're going to have to pull the trigger on something tomorrow, aren't we, Mr. Hool?
Mr. Chairman, that's exactly what I was going to say, and that is the reason why we have not cast as wide a net as I would love to be able to cast, is that the time frames here are so compressed. We have to have it completed by December 1st. And so frankly, we reached out to the vendors that we have regularly heard from prior to these funds becoming available. I've never been approached by another company in regards to broadband.
Right.
We've approached other companies in regards to broadband, but never the other way around.
Right, and I think we can make the decision, for CTC, to move forward. I think these other thoughts have to come into it. I think part of the discussion today has to be in regards to helping set our priorities, in regards to how do we want to allocate these funds in regards to our business community. Are we going to focus on to what level should we? we have a budget here, but that budget is only a budget. You know, we're saying maybe up to 3 million. Is that really enough, you know, that we need to do? Or do we need to reallocate some of those? You know, where are the budgets that we set going to be enough to assist the nonprofit, the business community? What county expenses are we going to be additionally maybe exposed to in this, along with recouping some of the expenses that we've already incurred? So I think there's part of this is looking at our budget and setting priorities of how we feel that the original outline that you had laid out and how we'd allocate that money.
So Bill, just to kind of understand what you're talking about, we're actually not talking about the county board's budget. We're not talking about the county's budget. We're talking about the $8 million that we're getting from the federal
Correct.
government and how we're going to distribute $8 million. You're saying if it's enough here or enough there. We're not adding any money to this.
No.
We have $8 million to distribute. If you look at this, we have a proposed 1.5 million for broadband, 1 million for nonprofits, 3 million for grants, reimbursement grants, contingent grants, million, so it adds up to $8 million. So the question is how do you not want to do any broadband? And then you do it, you take that $1.5 million and you add it to nonprofits? Or do you say, I'm not going to give anything to nonprofits, and then you add that to business grants? That's the decision that we have to make.
Correct.
Mr. Chair, if I
Correct.
might throw in here too, even the County Road 13 project throws a monkey wrench into this timeline because CTC has looked at the $1.3 million projects as the doable thing
Correct.
between today and tomorrow. And so if we start waiting for Steve to bring back a proposal on running down County Road 13, we may have just caused another problem for ourselves. So I think that we really need to look at what's being proposed by CTC currently, and that's the number that we address.
Yeah. And, the county board doesn't have to do, we don't have to do broadband. You could put all that into nonprofits, or you could put it into something else. That's the decision that I hate to say, we're not making a decision today, we're having a discussion, but I think we're getting a consensus of what to move forward with to tomorrow's board meeting, and we have to make a decision tomorrow.
Well, Steve, I am going to disagree with you as usual. We put 1.5 million forward. I would like to have Steve come back with the numbers for Lake Edward or just for County Road 13, and I would also like you, Administrator, to get a hold of Lake Edward Town Board. Don't they have some money that they got?
Yes, they did.
Let's see if they can add that to this pot
And, Mr. Chair, members,
for that project.
the broadband is the decision that, at least for the Camp Vanasek and the Borden Lake project, I think that CTC is looking for direction tomorrow. The rest of the budget, you do not need to finalize tomorrow. You do still have more time. The longer we take to finalize, however, the less time we have for implementation. And if there are any funds left over from the grant application process, to maybe expand the list of grantors to say businesses with more than 50 employees. So time is of the essence, and I don't want to rush you either. The Camp Vanasek and the Borden Lake, I think CTC is telling us they need an answer on those two by tomorrow. I still can reach out to the other companies throughout the county to see what could they deliver by December 1st. Now, the answer may be nothing. And if it is, then we at least have made the outreach. I think Steve can turn those numbers fairly quickly on the County Road 13 project. I'm not going to commit them to tomorrow, but if he can turn them by tomorrow, at least you'd have them in front of you by tomorrow. And we set aside 1.5, but to your point, Mr. Chairman, that's not necessarily the right number. The right number is whatever the five of you agree to. And so right now it's at 1.5. There would be room for a little more. And so whether that's in the northern part of the county or County Road 13, if you stick with the 1.5 number, there's still a little room.
Yeah.
Not a lot, but a little.
So I will say that I'm hesitant because of something that you said, Mr. Hool. You said, not sure if this is eligible for reimbursement. And I think it's still a gray area. But I think my vote is a yes, because I believe, Christie, and tell me if I'm wrong, I think that you and your company has made the commitment that if by chance this comes back and it's not, down the road, let's say it's not reimbursable, and that your company is willing to pay that back, correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, so then that alleviates the anxiety that I have about putting any money into broadband. I think if we've got that commitment, I got no problem on that. And but hopefully, Steve, you can come back from tomorrow and maybe come in on video and give Rosemary an answer, if that would be possible, at the county board meeting tomorrow.
I'll have an answer here shortly. I'm working on it as we speak, so.
Okay.
And the reason I keep talking
I'll
about this
hopefully
is
have
because
something
that
before we're
was,
done here today.
sorry. The reason I keep talking about that is because it was one of the original projects on the CTC packets.
Correct. Yeah.
Not something that's totally
Yep.
unrelated.
So just kind of just a more of a curiosity question, and where did it go now? So, Christie or Steve, what is Wi-Fi access points? I don't know what that means.
Sure, I can address that for you. The Wi-Fi access points were the ones that last week we talked about that we quickly put into play so that the students that didn't have access to broadband at their homes, and so that was the projects that we did with the schools where it showed if they didn't have access, how far from their home were they from getting access, and then we targeted areas to put up wireless access points where then students could go to those locations, have access to free high-speed internet to be able to do their education either from a car or sit outside or whatever that might be. We have 50 of those in place today, and so we've made a large investment in those. But the ones that are specifically in Crow Wing County, we went back and said, we're only going to ask for $38.75 of the expense that we've had into those, and CTC will assume the rest of that expense. And just as another point there, with that $3,875 and also the $209,000, those are funds that if we're able to recoup those now, we'll put those into broadband projects then into 2021. And so whatever monies we're pulling from the CARES Act, those will be reinvestment funds that we're going to put into future broadband projects. And so if we have to pay them back, we definitely will, but that's what I was talking about, where we have reached out this week, both federally and to other states that are doing projects with their counties, to make sure that we're not doing something completely and totally outside of the box. And in every case that I've talked to about that, these funds are available for broadband, but you have to show that they were COVID related, which is why we're doing the legwork on making sure we call each one of those COVID related drop customers to get on record that that's why they needed those drops. And to me, this is, if this money would come to CTC, this is reinvestment money that's going to go into more broadband.
Awesome. So if there's, I don't want to cut any discussion off, but I think let's try to wrap up the CTC discussion so that Christie doesn't have to stay on here if she doesn't want to for the whole, if we're here for 2 hours. So any other discussion on the broadband portion of the discussion that we're having today? Anything?
I'll only say one other thing,
Yeah,
just for
Steve.
clarification. Commissioner Franzine, I'm not against the County Road 13 project. I'm worried about the timeline to the chair's original statement, and I want to make sure that tomorrow we can make that decision regarding broadband and that we support CTC. And if County Road 13 comes in later and it's a number that we can facilitate, wonderful. I'm happy to do that. So I just
And
wanted
if
to be
they
clear
have-
on that.
Yeah, and if they have the numbers tomorrow and we have a discussion and we just deem it something appropriate that we can support, we can act on that tomorrow. So, any more discussion for Christie or Steve from CTC? Mr. Hool, anything?
No, if Steve does arrive at a number, though, while we're sitting here during
Yeah.
the meeting, then he can share that, and
Okay,
so.
so you can,
Just
we,
an FYI, this is Steve. It's about 1.7 miles of construction from where we currently are located. So I'm pulling the address list right now, and then I'll finish putting the numbers together for that piece for you guys.
awesome,
Thank you very much.
thank you. So let's.
You bet.
Let's move on to well, first of all, let's talk about this. Let's go over this. This is a proposed application. So in looking at it, just a couple questions on my part. So it doesn't say how much they can apply for. It says amount of funds requested. So,
Second page.
huh?
Which one are you looking at, first of all? Nonprofits or the profits?
No, the profit.
I think on the second page, it says somewhere up to 50,000, doesn't it? Or no, not 50,000.
Mr. Chairman, members, we did not want to specify an amount so that you could pick the amount that you
Right.
think. Now, keep in
So-
mind, the higher the amount of the potential grant, the less grantees we
Right.
will be able to support. So we had talked about 10,000.
Right.
Will that make a difference? You know, so I don't have a.
So what
hard and
you're
fast.
saying, then what your idea is on this, somebody might put in 42,000, and we might, a couple county board members and Bladek might review this, and then we don't have to, it's either not a yes or a no. We could award them 12,000, correct?
I am proposing that you should have an upper limit, whether it's 10,000, whether it's 25, whether it's 50. And so it would be grants up to. What that allows for is that someone might only need 2,000, and they only apply for 2,000. The city of Brainerd, when they did their economic development grant program, they did see that some of the applicants did not apply for the full amount that they could have applied for. And that's why I would say up to. You still should have an upper limit because, you know, geez, as you can see with CTC's 220,000, at 220,000, those grant funds go just like that.
Right.
And so I do suggest you have an upper limit, but that it be up to allow someone to apply for less than that.
So how would we see it, Tyler? So would we have a window of time where the applications would be sent in and then a cutoff date, I would assume, and then we would look all the applications over and then make the decisions on all of them, and then distribute the money then? Or, I mean, I guess I don't want to give all the money, you know, to just a small handful of people, you know, like, 'cause some people, some businesses, if you gave them $5,000, that would be a hell of a helping hand up. So, could we be looking at these and go, well, I'm not gonna give 50,000 to this person or this business, but I'm gonna give them 40,000 so that I can give this person that only asked for 5,000 money, so we have that ability to do that?
Yeah, you could do, I think there's kind of two choices. You could do first come, first served, and then it creates the issue that you talked about, Mr. Chairman, that you might have somebody who applies later in the process, but you're out of funds. And that has some advantage that, you know, once you're approving the applications as they're coming in, and so you can evaluate as they're coming in. The other alternative is you have an open application period. You accept any and all grants during that application period, which allows you to look at the totality of the perceived need in the community and make judgment calls then about, well, somebody may have applied for 8,000, but you're only going to give 6, or
Right.
we only have enough money to give everybody, you know, some percent, let's say 75% of what they asked for. The downside of that is you have the whole pile of applications that you have to go through all at once. There are pros and there are cons. I tend to lean towards the latter, to say you should have an open application period. In my ideal world, that would be the month of September. And so we would have a little bit of time to finalize this yet, but
Right.
not too much time. We should do some advertising like we talked about last time. And then you would evaluate all of the applications in the month of October. And the sooner, the better, the quicker, the better, right?
One more thing before I forget my thought. I guess the way I would like to see it is, like you said, an open application period, and then everybody sends their application in that window. And then we make the decisions on how that's gonna be distributed. But I don't think anybody should be, we shouldn't say, we'll look at them and say, 70% of them deserve it and these 30% don't. I think that somehow we need to figure out how every applicant, if they qualify,
If they qualify.
if
right.
they qualify, gets something and we distribute it accordingly.
And that's the
That make
advantage
sense?
of, yes, and that's the advantage of having the application period open for a fixed period of time so that you can see the whole universe of applications that you have in front of you. The only thing then that would be a disqualifying criteria are that they have to meet the eligibility criteria, and 2, the amount of money that you have. You may have 10 million in requests and you only have 3 million in funds. And so that becomes a limiting criteria, right?
So we're county board members, we're deciding, you know, I don't want to be the only one that's talking all the time and.
Give us
'cause
a
I-
chance then.
Well, I know, but I mean, I seems like I'm always the one that's doing all the talking. What we're trying to do is decide if this is what you want, if this is what we want. And so weigh in and tell me what you
Chair,
think. Yes,
And Deb, maybe you can answer this, but on this application, like the federal PPP, the application you fill out, it's based on employees and wages. Could we not develop some type of formula, whether it be on sales, you know, or employees, so then you don't have somebody that really qualifies for 8,000 asking for 20,000? And keep it fair and level, and then compile those, and then if it's $5 million and we only have 3 million, then you can just equally drop everybody consistently instead of somebody getting more than they need or asking for and those not. Is that anything that would be, it's a fairly simple formula that they use for the PPP program, and then it's consistent across the board regardless of.
The difference is your criteria can be whatever you want your criteria to be. You don't have to use that formula in determining how you're going to spread it, but you could include that information on the application if that was something that was going to be a desire to try to figure out how you're going to.
You know, it just seems like some businesses were totally shut down based on the orders. Others were partially opened, and some were, you know, open to go crazy. If we had the different tiers of how those were impacted kind of built into this, I think then it's fair across the board. And again, they got to meet the criteria, of course, but.
And we did ask them if they did receive any other grant
Right.
programs or any other grant funds as well, so that's.
so
where
is
the
that why this is on here? They're asking federal PPP,
Right.
federal EI.
But-
Is that why we're asking that?
So
Yes.
if they got PPP funding, or if they got some other federal grant funding that directly impacted them to provide some of that relief, maybe we don't want to give them as much again if somebody else didn't qualify or didn't receive any of the other funding.
And just keep in mind to that PPP is specific to what it can be spent on. It doesn't cover the thousands of dollars of lost goods that you have to throw away. So, I mean, it is a good point, but that is a very small window of use for PPP money. Businesses that, you know, were affected by this have lost several $1,000s, tens of thousands in lost inventory and stuff. So, again, it could be fairly complex if you want to try to factor all of it in, but just to have some level of consistency across the board, I think is important.
I have
So-
seen where some counties have done multiple tiers.
Yeah.
And I believe that those tiers were based on the number of employees, but I'm not sure. I'm going to ask Tyler to answer the question as well because he's seen more of them than I have. You could also choose to do it as a maximum grant amount per employee that they have. You do get into the business of trying to verify how many employees they have. Doesn't matter if they're part-time or full-time. So I would suggest you'd want to know how many full-time equivalents, and verification of that would be difficult. Tyler, what have you seen?
Yes, thank you very much. The challenge that we run into with some of this is that, as we talked about initially in regards to revenue related to expense, so if, to Commissioner Hoag's point, is that if we went down a path of creating a document inside the application that was asking for that type of information as far as, you know, what kind of revenue loss did you have, and base the grant amounts off of that need. I mean, we can do it, and I have seen a couple applications that have went down that path, and they basically created a scorecard. And so you create a scorecard based off of, you know, certain criteria that we would develop, and then you grant the money, the amount of money based off of that up to a certain dollar amount. To Administrator Hoole's point of setting a dollar amount, I think that's the most important thing to do, is to say we have up to X number of dollars, say it's $10,000, to grant out to these businesses that are 50 employees or less. The total number of businesses in Crow Wing County that have 50 employees or less is probably close to 3,000. But again, if we set the criteria, the guidelines based off of that they have to be eligible expenses related to COVID, then and they had to have been affected by those 2 executive orders that are listed on the application, that drops our number of businesses that are going to be eligible down significantly. So, you know, we have to factor that in as well. And so there's many points to this that could be, that, you know, we could go round and round on what makes the most sense. I think that if we just set a dollar amount, if they meet the criteria, like you said with the Brainards, I was involved with that. We had certain number of businesses that didn't request the full amount, and they just said, hey, here's the help I need, here's the dollar amounts that I need to cover my losses or cover the expenses related to COVID up to that point. So that was helpful. The state did their last, as you see on the application, there's one of the line items on there for one of the applications is showing the Minnesota Small Business grant, which is the last line item on there. They pooled their money into employee sizes. So they put a certain bucket of money into 10 employees or less, and then another up to 50, and then another up to 250. And they had, you know, a certain dollar amount factored into each of those buckets. So the majority of our businesses in Crow Wing County are 50 employees or less. And I think when we focus on that, that will help us reach the most amount of businesses and do the most amount of good with these funds.
Tyler, not to put you on the spot, but could you just run through those? Okay, so I know what federal PPP is. Federal EIDL, what is that?
It's the Federal Emergency Injury Disaster Loan. That was the loan that came out in the first stimulus package was actually done through the Small Business Administration. So the SBA had that put together to There were loans that was a cap of up to $2 million. It was a very elaborate program that businesses are still waiting for funds from that. The Minnesota Small Business Emergency Loan, that was an actual loan program that the state of Minnesota put out. And then the last one is the Small Business Relief Grant, which was, they set that up on a lottery system. So there was a $10,000 maximum grant that was awarded, but it was based off of a lottery system where they had, as I mentioned, they had buckets of money for each one of the company employee sizes. That was all managed by the initiative foundations in each one of the regions, but there was the last number, I think it was 27 or 28,000 businesses applied for that grants. That total is $62 million.
What do you think of my idea about when we get all, we tell everybody, get your application in, we get everybody's application in, and we don't go through the applications and then get halfway through them and go, oh, we're out of money. Now the other 50% of the applications, you don't get anything. I think that everybody that puts an application in, if it's qualified, that they should get some kind of grant. Otherwise, they wouldn't be filling out an application if they didn't think that they qualified. Does that, you know what I'm saying?
I do, and that's when looking at the amount of money that Administrator Houle has identified for this bucket, say it's $3 million, and we do have some work to do with the county or the townships and the cities and see what they want to do with some of their funds as well. But if we set it at $3 million and looked at the total number of businesses that could possibly be eligible, and I say possibly because I just don't know it as of today, but and then set a dollar amount that the grants are up to that amount, I think you'd cover the majority. I think you'd cover them all that were applying at that point. If you just said, say we've got 2,000 businesses that could be eligible and it's a $10,000 grant, you're at $2 million. So I think I like your idea of saying that if you apply and you're eligible, you should receive something.
Yes.
And I think if we set that dollar amount to know, it would be very hard to imagine going over that $3 million if everyone that applied was eligible. They got up to $10,000. I think that we'd get everybody covered.
Tim?
Mr. Chairman, just to put the numbers in some perspective, it was helpful for me anyway. If you had a $10,000 maximum and every applicant got the $10,000, then you have 300 that you can fund. If you did a $50,000 maximum, you can fund 60. And so what that maximum is makes a big difference of how broadly you can fund. And so then you're kind of guessing about, well, how many do we need to fund? But I would suggest the 300 is a lot better than the 60.
Right. So $10,000 max, but that doesn't mean they're going to get 10,000. That means that we're going to up to. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And does everybody understand what I'm saying about everybody? You look at all the applications, and if it winds up that some might get $5,000 and somebody might have applied for $5,000, and we might say, well, there isn't really enough money, but we're going to give you $2,000. I know if I was a business, I'd be happy to get something to help. So when you say, I go back to my barber, and I don't even know, I shouldn't even be talking about him because I've never even talked to him about this, but it's just a great example of him, and Doug said this, there's some businesses that were completely shut down, and they couldn't do anything to raise any revenue, and if barbers or salon owners were caught cutting hair or doing anything, they could lose their license. So just take those for example. So what would be, so Wayne, he was out of business for 2 months, so would allowable expenses be his rent? Because he still had to pay his rent for that 2 months, and I don't know, what, utilities, I mean.
PPE that he needs to buy in order to reopen.
Yeah, okay. So
And
What- go ahead,
another thing that
Rosemary.
I would like to make sure is that if we have a deadline, we actually stop taking applications at that time, because it isn't fair to the other people to just go on and on.
We've not provided for an appeal process here either, and the reason is because twofold. One, if you have county commissioners who are part of the process to review it, well, then it's kind of, the elected has already seen it. Two, what if you have, 75, 100 appeals? Just logistics of it scare me a bit. And so I think it is to let whoever you designate to do the review process, do the review process, and it is what it is.
Why do we even have to have an appeal
You don't.
We don't.
process?
I'm suggesting you don't.
No. Nobody's gonna, we're either gonna grant that you get something, like a smaller amount, and then if somebody's gonna say, oh, I got more coming. Well, be thankful you got what you got. I think.
Anticipating a question.
Oh, okay. How come it says principal 1 and principal 2, if it's, I would assume that most businesses are like an LLC or a sole proprietor, but we need to know the ownership percentage? Is that something that we need to know?
What was your
I don't
thoughts
know.
about that, Tyler?
So there is some, the reason that that's placed on there is because there was a, part of the guidelines we could put in there that if a person, if an individual owns multiple businesses, that they're only eligible to receive funds for one of their businesses. So that's the reason that the principal 1, principal 2 is listed on there, so that we don't have individuals who own multiple businesses applying for each one of their businesses for the same grant funds. But that's open, and we can,
Yeah, I just was
would
wondering.
add that piece to it, just because I think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ti-
Doug?
Tim, did you say that there are restrictions on how this money could be spent?
There are restrictions. It has to be COVID-related. It has to be spent by December 1st.
So in a case of some of these businesses that are trying to replenish their inventories cost, or their inventories, is that allowable use? Because like the PPP and stuff, you cannot use that for that type of,
Yes, I believe it would be here. So for instance, a restaurant is probably a good example where they had to either get rid of, give away, throw away their inventory because they were closed and things expire, right? So the cost of that inventory that they had to throw away, as well as I think the cost of replenishing it, would be COVID related.
Okay.
And then after December 1st, then we're requiring, I don't see where it would be, but we're requiring them to provide some kind of documentation so that we can put in a file somewhere that in case anybody ever wants to come and do
When they do.
Pardon me?
When they come,
When they come, okay.
they're coming.
Okay, they're coming.
I think they're gonna have to do spot checks. Think about this nationally. I don't think they're gonna be able to sit and review every application, but I would expect that the auditor is gonna go and do spot checks. And so we have to have the documentation for everyone and in order so that you can withstand that kind of audit scrutiny, and I think that's appropriate with public funds.
Mr. Chair, if I can add to that as well, we discussed amongst our group that we don't want copies of every receipt from every business that is listing the inventory they lost, the inventory they replenished, all those different things. We don't want all that paperwork. We are going to be asking them to submit a one-page statement with a line item delineation of what was the vendor, what was the expense for, and what was the cost associated with that. They are going to be required to retain those receipts and be available to provide that additional documentation if the auditors request it. So rather than us having boxes and boxes of paperwork that we're going to be dealing with, we're going to get the information, we'll provide it to the auditors, and then the businesses are agreeing to keep that original documentation for that purpose.
So another concern that I have is, maybe somebody can answer this, is, okay, so let's say we decide that we're gonna give $3 million in grants, and I don't think this is gonna happen, but let's just say it does. Let's say somebody comes here and they're looking through all these, you know, the allowable expenses, and let's say they go through the whole 3 million and they find 1 million that they say, no, these aren't eligible. Who's on the hook to pay the $1 million back? Is the county board and the taxpayers of Crow Wing County obligated to pay that back? Do you understand what I'm saying?
There is risk associated with that. Now, we, I think, should pass that risk on to whoever we gave the grant to say, you must give the grant back if your documentation does not pass audit scrutiny.
Great.
There's the risk of that.
Yes.
They don't have it, they're no longer in business. You know, I can think of a variety of circumstances in which trying to get blood out of a turnip could be difficult. Then we are on the hook for it.
But I think we need to think about that, because instead of our levy being 5 or 6%, our levy could possibly be to pay some of this back if some bureaucrat in Washington says, oh, you owe us $2 million. I believe it's about every 400,000 is a point, so that'd be another 4 or 5% on the levy, correct?
Correct, and one of the reasons I think we need to maximize the reimbursement that we can for Crow Wing County's own expenses. We did have a 2020 budget. We are on budget, but we are eligible to receive reimbursements. I think to the extent that that trickles through your budget, it will either be fund balance growth or available for those kinds of purposes.
Okay.
And so in my mind, that's how I think we can and should ensure against that possibility. Whether, my preference, of course, would be that it's fund balance growth, but if it's not, and at least we have to have some reserve for that potential. I don't expect it to be huge because the grant amounts are pretty small, and we're not focusing on revenue, we're focusing on expense. We're trying to minimize the risk. Think of it as high risk, medium risk, and low risk. I think we're trying to stay in the low to medium risk category. We don't want to do something that might be medium to high risk because it increases the potential for us to have to pay it back. We're trying to stay in the low to medium risk to minimize that possibility. It also means if we're not considering revenue losses, well, that's a whole category of loss that we're saying we're not going to replace.
Bill, what do you think? Is this application meet with your approval? Any changes, any thoughts, what do you think?
I mean, I'm comfortable with the application. I think
Okay.
that there's been good thought that's put into it, and I think I like the kind of, check and balance on it too. So, no, I think that they've done a good job of putting it together.
Rosemary?
Are we just talking about the small business?
Just the small business one, and we'll move on to the,
That's good.
good, Doug?
Something that Taylor mentioned earlier, but if you've got a business owner that has 7 establishments, are we saying that that individual only is qualified to receive 1 grant for all 7, or can they apply, because each of their businesses could be impacted in different ways?
Correct.
Why would they not be eligible for each of those establishments?
I think that they can certainly, Commissioner Hoag, it's just, that's a very consistent, across the board with all of the CARES Fund applications that I've reviewed and gone through, that seems to be very consistent, is to keep a business owner that has multiple businesses away from, saying, I've got, as you mentioned, 7 businesses, and get, to receive it is, if it is up to $10,000 for that one individual to get $70,000 worth of grants. So I'm open to, certainly discussion on that, and I would hope, I'm sure you all have some opinions on that. It's just, that's just what I placed on there based on consistency with other counties and other grant applications that I've worked on.
Okay, it just, to me, if it's 7 businesses and 1 owner versus 7 businesses and 7 owners, it still seems to be, the same amount of money regardless. That poor individual that has 7 businesses and trying to scrape through seems a little disadvantaged to me, but.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Hoag, there's nothing that's preventing anybody from applying for 7 applications. If they do own 7 businesses, the way the application is currently worded doesn't disqualify them from that purpose. The principal listings, as far as finding out the ownership of each one, is just kind of for your purpose when we're doing the review of those applications, would be a component that could be looked at that way. But there's nothing that would limit to say you can only have 1 application
Okay,
per
that's-
person.
Then I misunderstood. I thought that's what, okay.
Steve, what do you think?
Well, I like the application. For clarification though, you know, on the bottom of the first page, we can fill in the dollar amount up to.
That's
Are
where we
we-
left it blank for you.
Right.
I think it should be 10,000, but
So I would want to know. if
up
the-
to 10,000.
Right, right.
What do you think?
I'm comfortable with that, but I just wanted to see if the rest of the board
Right.
was before I.
Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
10?
at this
Up
time.
to 10. Rosemary? Doug?
And that's based on employee?
Right. That's one of the eligibility criteria.
One of the eligibility criteria would be small businesses with 50 or less employees, and I want to direct your attention, before you're done with the 10,000, back to that eligible list. It does not currently have any tiers associated with different levels of, different numbers of employees.
So a business that was totally shut down, the barber that couldn't do anything, could potentially be held to the same amount of money that a business that could still do takeout orders, or at least have enough revenue coming in to maybe pay the light bill. It just seems like there maybe could be 2 qualifications based on the impact of the governor's order. Some were totally at 0 revenue, some had partial revenue, and I don't, again, how do you separate that out? I guess would be maybe a question on the questionnaire, but it, you know, I mean,
You certainly, because we haven't set a tier, that doesn't mean that you can't, when you look at all of the applications that you have in front of you, develop other criteria about how you're going to score each of these applications.
Right.
so if,
Let's say you get 6 million in applications, okay, you're going to have to come up with some way to whittle those back down to 3 million if that's what we have to spend. I do think one of the criteria on the back that we should consider making ineligible is franchise restaurants with drive-ups.
Right.
Because I do think that if you're a franchise restaurant with a drive-up, that is not the same as a local bar that tried to quickly switch to takeout. I think the franchises with a drive-up still did a considerable portion of their business through the drive-ups. I think a small family bar that tried to switch quickly to takeout business was not nearly as successful at that. And so I would keep the small family bar in, but consider whether you want to have franchises, McDonald's, Burger King. Perkins would still be eligible because they didn't have a drive-up. But, I mean, these are the kinds of things that I want you to wrestle with.
So Doug,
so you could not have like a little, just to check, you were totally shut down or you were partially shut down?
I think, Doug, to your question, there's a question on here that says the number of your employees who have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic does address that. So if you're that barber and you're the only employee in that shop, it impacted 100% of your business. If it only impacted half of it, that's going to be acknowledged here. So I think that question does kind of get at what you're asking.
We also have, the second bullet has eligible applicants must have been temporarily closed due to Executive Order 20-04 and later clarified by Executive Order 20-08. Those were the governor's executive orders that required bars, restaurants, fitness clubs, hair salons, tattoo parlors, all forced to close. There are other businesses in our community that chose to close. They would not be eligible for these grant funds as it is currently written. You can change that if you wish, but that's the way it has been constructed.
How do you identify those though, like on this?
They're specifically called out in the governor's executive order.
But those that were allowed to operate, but given their location or whatever it may be, that just chose to close because it's cheaper to be totally closed, how would you identify those businesses on this application?
Oh, we're going to ask for information about what the business is, what's the purpose of the funds, and I think maybe we need to add a section that says, how was your business affected by the governor's
It
executive
just
order?
something, because,
Because
yeah.
you may have had I don't know, a hardware store wasn't ordered closed.
But it says that, it says, how has COVID-19
Right.
pandemic financially affected your business? So I would
First
think
question.
that they would give a written statement of, wouldn't they?
What came to my mind was, what about like a framing shop? I don't think a framing shop was specifically called out in the governor's executive order. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tyler. And since they were not, they may have still chosen to close anyway, but that would make them ineligible for these grant funds. I don't know, is that a decent example, Tyler?
Yeah, that's a very good example. You're going to run across a number of these that are going to, and that's why, a couple of the commissioners, myself and other individuals will be going through these applications, because we are going to have some that are going to be, I don't want to say they're judgment calls, but, there are some good examples of those. We may have a good example would be a travel agent. So a travel agent during that time, their business was completely impacted, but they weren't forced to, by these executive orders, they weren't told to close their doors. But so that would be one that you would probably need to make a decision on. The other part of this is some of the retails with their online activity. You have to take those things into consideration as well. But the framing store is a good example. We're going to run across a few of those that are going to end up being, committee calls, if you will.
Doug, that's the kind of the way I foresee it, is I foresee it that if the board wants to have it, I think we should have elected people involved. I think there should be two of us to go along with what Tyler and his staff are doing over there. And then if they're sitting around, they got all the applications, I think you could kind of sort things out and go through them. And I think that all of us that have lived here or have been here for a long time, I think we could look these over and kind of say, yeah, I think we'd kind of understand what's going on. I don't know. And then I think you'd kind of maybe set up some criterias there at the committee and try to figure out how to weed through these applications.
I think you're going to inevitably have to do that.
Yeah.
Because we can't possibly consider every possible circumstance in advance. People will come forward with fact sets that never occurred to us.
And I guess as long as, if it is a judgment call, as you said, as long as they're just being considered, I guess, and it sounds like that this committee will be looking at them individually, and some businesses were just impacted equally as those that were ordered to shut down versus those that weren't, but the same effect. So it just, as long as they get represented fairly and I don't know that you could capture all of that on, no matter how the form would have to be 50 pages thick, to capture all that, but as long as they're getting looked at and considered, that's all that I
Yeah, and I
would
think we're just trying to
request, so.
keep it simplistic too, though.
Yeah, so, and it
The
sounds
only-
like that's the case here, so I
The only thing is Tyler, here's a suggestion that I have is, okay, so if I was sitting in this committee and we're going through these and deciding, and let's say I have this application in front of me and I'm uncertain and I have a question, there's no place on here for a telephone number or a contact person, at least I don't see it. And I'd like to
bottom of
just
page 2.
reach out. Is it on there?
Bottom of page
There's
2.
an email address.
Very bottom.
Okay.
And I'll Commissioner Coring, I will update that to make sure that the most appropriate individual is contacted when, or for us to be able to contact them or for them to contact us with questions. When we went through the Brainerd one, I had a handful of phone calls after the applications came through with questions or, a couple people trying to make their case that they should be eligible.
The only thing is Therese was pointing me out for questions, the phone number. I didn't mean that. I meant the phone number of the applicant.
Oh,
You know, there's no
Yeah.
place for the phone number of the applicant, so let's say it's
There
Wayne's,
is.
let's say it's
It
Wayne's
should-
Barber Shop, and I need to, and we're trying, there is?
Yep.
right in the top page, right, full business information. Mailing address, location.
Okay, sorry about that, I guess I
No, that's okay.
spaced that out. Good enough. Steve-o,
Mr. Chair. The other concern I have is that the application shows October 29th as the date that they should be applied into to Administrator Huel's point. I would like to see the month of September as the period when the applications have to be in. And to Commissioner Franzine's point, and she and I agree on this, that is a hard period of time, and there's nothing considered after that. So you have to get it in within that
Correct.
month, so that we have time to distribute those funds.
so
In
Bill, no
October.
coming in after the deadline.
No?
I think, Commissioner Barrows, I think I may have, it's probably on one application and it's not on the other. I believe that I did place a September 30th as the deadline date. It might be on it might be on the nonprofit one and not, I may have missed it on the for-profit, but I wholeheartedly agree. A hard stop on the 30th of September gives us the month of basically October to vet through these applications and award the grants. But, you know, to all of your point, a hard stop with no gray area for, you know, one comes in on, you know, October 2nd, that it should be granted into that. I agree with you 100%.
Okay.
And thank you, Tyler, and I do see that on the nonprofit, if we can just switch that on the for-profit application.
I certainly will do that.
Okay, so anybody else on the for-profit grants, and does it look, Tim Hool?
I just want to direct your attention to the second page, eligible applicants, that list of bullet points, and ineligible applicants. And I want you to look through those and think about, is there something we missed? I'll give you a couple of examples. One is, do you need to be a resident of the state of Minnesota? We have not included that. We have said you have to have a physical location here, but we have not included that you must be a resident of Minnesota. You could. Do you want to make franchises with drive-ups? Ineligible. You don't have to? You could. On that list, what else do you want to have on there that we have missed?
Well, I do think that your suggestion for having them be a resident of Minnesota is a good one.
It's up to you guys.
So I didn't quite hear, Commissioner, you do want that to be part of it?
I think that would be a good idea.
And I would agree with that. I think that these are dollars that were given to the state of Minnesota and to the taxpayers of Minnesota, and I think if they're not a resident of Minnesota, they're paying taxes or not paying taxes somewhere else. And I think that that's important, that we have them be a resident of Minnesota.
Do we
That's
have a-
not gonna be, somebody say you're discriminating against me.
This is Minnesota money.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be.
Of course, you're going to have people that will criticize us
Yeah.
on this process, no matter
Yeah.
what you do. I am interested in hearing Tyler's perspective, because I do think there will be a lot of LLCs that we will fund, and how the ownership of that stacks out in terms of residency. Any issues from your perspective with requiring that, Tyler?
Yeah, I'm just gonna think here, is there, this is a tough one, because if it's, you know, if the business owner, if they are 50/50 owners, or if it's the majority ownership is owned by an individual that is not a resident, would that, in your opinion, kick this out? That's a challenging one, because it's, you know, you could have a silent partner, or that's someone that's not a resident, but still owns a percentage of the business? I mean, do we need to, do you want to get specific to the point of the principal owner must be a resident and leave it there? Or if you're equal footing and one lives here and one does not, does that kick them out? I guess that's my couple of questions for the board.
Well, wouldn't it be really easy to look at where their tax statement is sent, and if it's in Minnesota, that would be the criteria? I don't know whether that's fair or not, but
They don't necessarily have to own property taxes. They may or may not be a taxpayer. They're applying as a business owner, they wouldn't necessarily have to own the property, they could rent it. Like your example of the They
But
wouldn't have a tax statement address.
okay, that's true.
they're still paying property tax here, right?
In a roundabout way, they're paying rent, and the rent is supporting the
Property
property
tax.
tax. I think Commissioner Franzine was probably referring to income tax and whether or not they file income tax in Minnesota. Tyler, do you have a recommendation?
My recommendation would be that if they're the sole owner and they do not reside in the state of Minnesota themselves, I would say that that's an ineligible applicant. If they're a principal owner, if they own 50% or more of the business, that if that individual is from the state of Minnesota, I think they would be eligible.
Principal owner must have 50% or more and be a resident of Minnesota.
I'm comfortable with that.
Yep, I can go with that.
That's fine.
Okay, we've got to agree.
I guess I feel comfortable that if you get Tyler's staff, and like I said, if the county board makes the decision that I think we need to have 2 board members, elected people, who is representing this county board, to be in there making the decision, I think a lot of these are gonna be, you're gonna be sorting through these applications and making judgment calls in that committee, and I think that's the way it should be done. But
Any other criteria that you think should be on that list? I've talked about franchises, but you don't have to include it.
anything else, Tyler, that you can think of? Okay.
What, Tim, when you say franchises, what are you, like the McDonald's? And
Yeah, I'm suggesting that you might want to consider whether or not McDonald's is ineligible, because they probably sustained a good chunk of their income through their drive-up. That is not to say that those aren't locally owned. They are.
They are.
And so you can include them if you will. I guess my thought was they probably did not suffer as much as a mom and pop restaurant.
So could you, I don't know if that's doable, but in a case like that, could you contact these people to say, can you show us what your sales were? Because I know some of these drive-throughs, you know, they're lined up 2 blocks deep to get, so they probably, their business was not impacted at all, if not increased. Is it possible to say, if you're, as you're going through these and you see one of these, can you say, could you provide us this information as far as your sales numbers, or is that reaching outside of?
We do have on the application, how has COVID-19 pandemic financially affected your business? And so if you can't answer that question because your business was greater than.
But they could
and-
just say negatively, and
Right.
that would be it. We would, wouldn't you want more to just confirm that?
The only thing is, Doug, is what you're talking about is, okay, so let's say the grant applications are, the cutoff is September 30th. Okay, so this committee and a couple board members gets to work. I don't know, let's say there's, out of 3,000, let's say 600 people apply. 600 is still a lot of applications to go through. The money has to be spent by December 1st. So you've got to get these grants out. So if you're going to go Well, I got 300 of these applications. I want more financial information from them. I don't know how you're gonna get it done. I mean, I think it's gonna be kinda difficult.
Well, I
to
It's a
me.
challenge, and that's where setting the eligibility criteria up front becomes the way you screen them in part. Now, it's gonna be an incomplete list no matter how well you do this, but you are trying to figure out in advance by setting those eligibility criteria. As Tyler has reminded us that 72% of the businesses in Crow Wing County stayed open. And so we're not targeting these funds towards any of those. You could set eligibility criteria for a franchise with a drive-up, but you should only do so if you think that they were not as negatively impacted as other businesses that were forced to close. That's what the criteria is trying to do, is to save you from having to do those kinds of documentation, what could turn out to be very difficult in this time frame.
Okay, so do you feel like you have enough direction to finalize an application for us to approve tomorrow?
Yes,
You do?
unless you have any other criteria you want to add.
Okay.
Then we will bring
What-
that forward, and if that does meet with the board's approval tomorrow, I would see us producing kind of a cover sheet. What is this grant program about? We will
Yeah.
also try to anticipate the questions that we will get to the best of our ability, and we will produce a frequently asked questions document. That packet with this application material is the entire program.
And
So
I
if
would
you
like to
approve
see,
this, I think we can do those things, if that's okay.
and I would like to see us advertise
Yes.
that, just like Gary was doing for the land sale, I thought those ads were really put together. So if we say, the Crow Wing County is taking applications for the Federal CARE Act dollars to be distributed, and you can apply, however the ad would be, but I think that's important to get that, because I think if you get it on the local radio station, it's gonna get out, because, with the dispatch going to Wednesday and Sunday paper, I just don't know that, unless people are seeing it online, I don't know, I guess we could put an ad in there, or a pop-up in there too, I guess.
We should do, I think, either electronic or paper newspaper. I think we should do radio, and I think we should do social media. That would be the strategy that I would suggest, unless
Yes.
that's what we will do, unless you tell us differently.
And we
now
can
would be a
pay
good
for it
time.
out of that money, Tim?
Yes, it
Okay,
is eligible for
perfect.
CARES Act reimbursement. That would be part of Crow Wing County's costs.
Yeah. Okay. Bill, anything?
Nope.
Nope. Steve?
I have one other question. On the nonprofit, are we going to still leave that at the 10,000, up to 10,000?
Well, we're gonna talk about that right now.
Okay.
Move on to this, if we're done with that other one.
I'm presuming that the for-profit one is the one that we have been talking about.
That is one we've been talking about.
If you approve the application, I want to be clear with you guys that I'm not going too far in front of you. If you approve the application, you're essentially approving the program.
Correct,
And then we will go and execute it,
correct.
okay?
And I believe that we have to make a decision tomorrow,
The
so
sooner
that
the
we can
better.
move forward. Pardon me?
The sooner the better.
Right. Okay, so what I thought, well, what I was wanting it to be is we're just talking about the grant application, so now we're, for profit, now we're moving on to the nonprofit application, and we want the board to weigh in on whether or not you think that this is going to work for you, if this is, and if you want to change something, what is it, Steve?
Not necessarily do I want to change anything. One thing I need to know from Kim would be how many nonprofits actually operate in Crow Wing County, and
From
then-
who?
Pardon me?
From who?
Kim Rollins. She's with the United Way.
Okay.
Or perhaps Tyler has this information too.
Actually, Kara, I believe, did say there's 650 plus nonprofits in Crow Wing County
Okay.
at the last meeting.
Kara, Are those only the 501c3s, or are they the other? There are 29 different 501s.
Yeah, no, this is Kim. It was 501Cs. So that is all 501Cs, not just 501c3s and that kind of stuff. I can get that information. That'll take quite a bit of time to define though.
Okay.
And I think what we need to do on that is, being that, couldn't we just send out like a standard letter to each one of them and let them know that we're taking applications, and wouldn't that be wise? Kara?
Mr. Chair, County Board, couple different routes. So, for example, with the churches in the community, I have met with the pastors, Kim and I, of a couple different churches, and we're going to be creating just a quick video saying these are the eligibility requirements once you have laid out what those are, as well as the application process. So then we can get that information out to the churches, for example.
Right.
And then the letter is a really great idea. And then following the same communication pattern, I would see that you'll be using for the small businesses, we
So-
could potentially use for the nonprofits.
So I guess I kind of look at it different as far as, I look at a church and then I look at a nonprofit. Even though a church is a nonprofit, I look at them as two different entities. You know, I don't know that I think that these, nonprofit is like the soup kitchen, and, you know, the churches, their membership supports them, and yes.
Mr. Chair, we have tried to draw a distinction, and we are excluding from funding here the religious organization and their proselytizing function, their normal church operations. They would argue, and I think this is fair, that they closed down too, and they saw their contributions
And they did.
just drop.
And they did.
Right?
And they
But
did,
what
yeah.
we are saying is, a religious organization without a social services component, in other words, they have to have been engaged in some kind of outreach to helping. If
Yeah.
they provided shelter for families that got displaced because of COVID, now, I don't know if anybody has, I'm just using that as an example, then they would be eligible for those expenses associated with the social service component, but we would not fund their normal operations. You can change that if you wish. That is the distinction that we thought made the most sense. We had similar misgivings, but that's a judgment call that is yours.
Sure. And the biggest issue that I have is I want to make sure that I don't want to have, after the deadline, I don't want to have somebody call me up and say, I never knew anything about this. Because I got a call from a 91-year-old lady, and she says, Paul, I've known you for a long time, and she says, I don't want you to forget about Breath of Life. Never heard of Breath of Life, honestly, but she told me about all the great things that Breath of Life is doing, and I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we're doing this, and that we can, that they all have an opportunity to apply. And like I said before, I think everybody should get something. I don't know, that's just the way I
We will try to
think.
include the nonprofits in the advertising that we do.
Yeah,
I think it's appropriate.
yeah.
You know,
Bill?
well, I think we need a little discussion too in regards to the 501c6. I see that it's on the application that they can apply. Probably the organizations that fall under that are going to be the Chamber of Commerce's.
Yes.
And I know that they've got, we've got 5 of them within, you know, that county, and saying, and they have not, they've been excluded from any support, you know, from the COVID funds that have been out so far. So, and they have been a major partner in regards to working within our communities and our businesses. So,
That's why they're on there.
I was talking with Commissioner Franzine late this week, and we were talking about this issue of 501c3 versus C6. And we maybe
501.
want to consider just saying tax exempt. And on the back of the page, we have that they must submit with their application a copy of their most recent IRS, and I think it's tax exempt determination letter. If you're a for-profit business, you don't get tax exempt status. You only get tax exempt status if you're charitable or a membership organization. If we only have 501c3s and C6s, we might miss someone.
There's one that says other, where
There
the
is other.
veterans organizations, they're a 501c23.
C23.
They could put their,
So I don't want to exclude anybody who's tax exempt. That's the point, is looking at their tax exempt status.
You know, I would just say too that the, you know, not that I'm calling out anybody individually, but I know I think of like the senior center, and you know, when you're a senior, to me, you have to have I think everybody, no matter what your age is, you have to have a purpose in life. And I think of the conversations, and I hope this is okay, but Rosemary, we talk and you tell about your mom, and your mom being literally locked in her house now, where she used to go to the senior center all the time. And I think that this has had some kind of, you know, effect on people, that they can't have any interaction with people. I think we're gonna have repercussions of this lockdown for a long time in the future, I think. But Bill, I'm gonna just go around the room. Bill, what do you think of the application? Anything that, additions, corrections?
No, I think again, it was well thought through, and
Okay,
I support it.
Rosemary?
nope, I gave suggestions before, and they are incorporated into here.
Okay, Doug?
Tim, there's a list of some of the nonprofits on here. What are those? I mean, we know there's a lot more than those out there, but how did we establish them and the dollar figure?
Kara put those on there.
Okay. Or is,
And you can think about nonprofits in two different ways, and you don't have to, but this is the way we have thought about them in two different ways. There will be some programs that we want to do outreach on to make sure that it is appropriately covered. And these are the organizations that Kara has reached out to with specific programs that we want to make sure, and she can give you a list of what they are. Beyond that, then, there are losses that nonprofits have suffered. And so this is kind of divided into two categories. The one is a dedicated list. There would not be an application process for these. If we have forgotten someone, we need to hear about it. And then the application is kind of, if you have a loss, we might get an application for Bridges of Hope, for instance, for their losses, but we also are going to engage Bridges of Hope for the program that Kara can talk about. We don't have to do it that way. We could have all designations, or we could have only grants. What we're proposing is a bit of a mix of both of those. So, Kara, maybe you can walk through what each of those grants would represent.
If I'm understanding your statement correctly.
I didn't understand
Mr.
it. So,
So I'll give, Tim brings up a good example, Bridges of Hope. So they've incurred expenses related to COVID with having to adjust their facility to protect their staff and clients who are coming in. But they also provide programs related to rental reimbursement, help with utilities, food resources, that sort of thing. So there are two different paths. We'd potentially assist in covering their business expenses related to COVID, and then their ability to help others in the community with expenses related to COVID, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So the initial list, and it certainly is not a complete list of all of the places that Kim and I have actually reached out to, just to say, hey, this money's coming around, heads up, we've got a lot of preliminary work to do, so not sure how it's all going to shake out, but this money is here. Would you be able to utilize CARES Act funding based on these criteria? So I've had a lot of conversations just to set the stage with a number of different nonprofits. I have a spreadsheet of who all I've talked to, so that's not a complete list at all. Okay. At the time that was printed, those were the organizations that I had talked to, so.
So those on this list, they would still fill out a form for
absolutely.
potential other funding that would help cover cost of?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Correct.
And then we did say that, I think it was Bill mentioned, like the chambers and the economic development groups and stuff, they still can qualify for funds too, as
yes.
Those are going to be the people that get this county back to where we were at one time as far as visitors coming and stuff, so, okay, that answers that, I just wasn't sure where these came from, but that,
So just to expand on what he said, so what are you, this is your stuff, Tim, right? What are you proposing? Are we saying that the county board is going to approve this plus this? Or are we saying that these are just part of the 600 and they all have to apply? And then we'll decide? Or is that what you're saying?
Both. So we're asking for, we would be asking for the board's approval for these grant amounts, and Kara, if there are additional ones that you wish to add to the list, or are you just saying that they need to apply?
They need to apply. Those were just some preliminary amounts that I had discussed with the nonprofits, like, hey, what's the impact been on COVID? What do you think? 50,000, is that kind of an approximate in terms of the impact? The one thing that I would also draw your attention to in terms of the nonprofit application is the request up to amount has been left blank. So
It's
I don't
what?
know. The request up to amount at the bottom of the application has been left blank or just with dollar signs. So you would need to decide, is the nonprofit grant also a $10,000 up to maximum? Or how much would you like that to be?
Right, and then, but if you're saying $50,000, then the grant application would have to be up to $50,000.
That's the issue, is do we want to fund any programmatic outreach for things like food, shelter, and those? That's what this list represents. To the extent that you fund anybody at 50,000 for $1 million, that's 20. That's just 20.
Well, that's what I'm saying, and so,
So-
I don't, why wouldn't these people have, these organizations have to fill out a grant application, and we look at each application individually and then decide, because we've already picked some winners here, and then now the rest of you send in an application, and I'm gonna decide whether, right, or what?
That's just a preliminary list.
Right.
That's not to say those are the amounts that need to be approved. They can, I was anticipating they would go through the regular application process, just like everybody else would. But that, at the time I was having the discussion when this document came out, those were the numbers we were throwing around. But I also said that nothing had been decided and it has to come in front of you guys. So if you determine that $10,000, up to $10,000 is the grant application amount, then that's the amount that would be applied to all of the nonprofits or the tax exempt status countywide. So you wouldn't be picking these folks out to get that amount and then a different amount for others. Does that make sense?
I think that's fine. What I think you've got to recognize is you're not going to get any programmatic outreach. You're not
We'll
gonna
get up to
any-
10,000, but here's the thing.
I think that what
They-
they're probably going to apply for that 10,000 is to recover their own costs first.
And to keep in mind that this is the work they're already doing. So they have some monies budgeted for this type of outreach
Right.
already.
Yeah.
And so, for example, the conversation that I had with Career Force, we had talked about, how much do they think they could get out the door in terms of helping folks who were behind in their rent. And they said, Kara, we don't have any additional staff. So it's not like we're going to be able to pump out a lot more programmatic dollars without additional staff. There's only so much work we can do. So we talked about 20,000 was probably the most that they could get out, or maybe it's 30,000. I've had so many conversations, was the most that they could get out the door by that December 1st period of time. So we have to be realistic about that December 1st date too, in terms of how much work
So
they
what
can
does the
get done.
county board want to do? Does the county board want, the question is do you want to approve those?
Absolutely not.
Okay, there's one answer. Doug? And then, the way it looks to me is, we're making a decision tomorrow whether we're gonna approve these that are on the list, or we're gonna say, no, everybody has to put an application in, and then,
well, I think we need to see the entire list.
This is it.
There's more coming, or there's more to this?
That's what she gave
I
us
think
the
Kara
last
is
time.
suggesting that we just do the application process.
Yes.
Which would be a lot easier.
right.
Yes,
And so.
because I could add people to this list too,
Right.
but
And we probably wouldn't be able to get a comprehensive list to you, so we'd forget somebody.
Right.
And so the question is, if we use the application process, then the applicant can decide whether or not they would like to use that for outreach services, for food assistance or rental assistance, or whether or not they need those funds to write their own ship. It's simpler if you just use the application
I
process.
want everybody to have an equal opportunity, not just these 8 hand-picked people. I mean, I think that's important with 650.
Well, even at 600, let's just say hypothetically, all 600 put an application in, and we gave every single one of them, and we divided that $1 million up, that's $1,600, almost $1,700 per nonprofit.
At 650, it's 1,538.
Well, I've got 1,666.
At 600.
Okay, well, whatever. I'm just making a point is all I'm
Yeah,
making.
yeah, it's not a lot of money, but we need to make sure everybody gets an
So,
opportunity.
so now we gotta make a decision. Okay, so it looks like we've kind of decided that everybody has to fill out an application. Now the next question is, what's the limit?
Has any of these nonprofits received other federal, and is that captured on this application?
That is captured on the
Okay,
application.
so we would
Yeah.
know, like the PPP for the businesses, okay.
For Bridges of Hope, for example, if they receive PPP, then that money would have gone toward the funding for their business, but not necessarily for outreach programs for people in the
Okay.
community.
Nonprofits were eligible for PPP as well.
Oh, okay, all right.
So, Mr. Chairman, we're proposing, I would add tax exempt status to that top line. We have 501c3, 501c6, and other. Just to clarify, that's what that is. I think what I would propose is the same $10,000 limit, up to $10,000 limit that we had on the for-profit side. We would put Kim Rollins and United Way contact information on the back. That's what I have for you.
Yeah, so would it be the same, are we thinking that Bladek would be helping us with this process, or who would do that?
We would use Bladek for the for-profit.
Right.
And the reason there is because they have, I think, specific, unique knowledge about the for-profit sector and the programs that were out there and what businesses could have qualified for. We're proposing to use the United Way for the nonprofit side because we think they have the best connections with nonprofits in the community. Nobody has all 650. But they have the best outreach, and they're accustomed to doing grant cycling like this.
Who does?
United Way.
That's Kim.
And then, well, this is up to the board, but I would foresee that we should have 2 board members that are elected by the citizens of Crow Wing County that should be on that committee and helping to make that decision.
Yes, Bladek and United Way are helping with the logistics and the application processing. They might even have some thoughts to add to you guys in the deliberation, but at the end of the day, I would suggest that it's the 2 county commissioners. In order for our documentation to be as solid as it can be, I'd like to see that full list come back to the full county board to get approved.
And-
There's some risk of getting into the weeds on each one of them, but I think it's a good move.
And I would think that Bladek and United Way would be well served to have county board member, because if somebody came back and says, well, this was a friend of yours, then you can say, hey, there's elected people that made the decision. And so you're off the hook, I think. But, so I'm gonna go around the room and put everybody on the spot. Bill, what number do you want? Up to 10,000, or what are you thinking?
Well, I guess I'd maybe ask Kara for some advice on that in regards to, because our pool is so much smaller, is 10,000 important, or do we drop it down to something like 5,000 in regards to being able to coverage?
Commissioner Barrows, County Board, I think the 10,000, up to 10,000 would allow for not only the business expenses to be covered, but then their ability to help others in the community to be covered. So I think 10,000 is reasonable to potentially do both.
Yep. I can support 10,000.
10? Rosemary? 10? Doug?
Well, is it worthy of discussion as a tiered type thing too? Because some of these nonprofits are much larger outreach than the other smaller ones. I mean, they're all very worthy of grant dollars, but do you hold the larger ones to the same limit as maybe a smaller nonprofit? I don't know how you separate that out.
That's a great question. Use LSS, for example, who are statewide and provide services and have a pretty good budget already for helping individuals with shelter expenses and rent expenses. They may not need as much in terms of the grant amount than like Bridges of Hope, who is a local community-based nonprofit. If you would like, I'd be happy to serve on reviewing applications as well to talk through some of that kind of thing. It's totally up to you guys. But to be able to provide that perspective in relation to the different nonprofits in the community.
Well, again, I don't know if you can capture that on this application.
Right.
As to, you fall into this category, so it's 10,000, or you may fall into this at 5,000, whatever. I don't know how you would.
Well, I think the committee would be making that decision on what they're gonna do. I mean,
Well, I thought,
Included on the application, on the front page,
Huh?
the FTE number of employees, the number of volunteers they have, and the annual average number of people served. And so that'll give you some idea of the breadth of their impact. And so a smaller nonprofit, I would expect, would have a more narrow impact. Think about like kinship. There's a limited number of kids that they serve. They serve a lot, mind you, but it's probably not quite the same as the Salvation Army.
do you put that on the application, though?
Yes.
Because on the business one, we're gonna have a limit, so.
There's no limit on employees on the nonprofit.
No,
You
but a
could.
dollar
You
amount.
could. We would say the funding amount is up to 10,000, no more
Okay.
than that.
That's
And then
what we're
we're
asking
for the
now.
number of their employees, we're asking for the number of their volunteers, and we're asking for the average number of people served, so that you could get an idea.
Then you
of-
sort it out based on
Yep,
that.
and then sort it out based on that.
But that doesn't mean everybody that applies would qualify for 10,000.
That is correct. In fact, I doubt there will be enough funds for everybody
won't
to
be.
qualify for 10,000. It's just an upper limit. It gives you some flexibility.
Correct.
We know that we are trying to expand the pool here by asking our cities and our townships to participate with us in this program with their CARES Act funds. So I have sent a letter to all of the cities and all of the townships inviting them to participate with us. Even if they don't have any CARES Act costs of their own, we are asking, and we will assist in helping them draw down their CARES Act funds so that we could put it into these two pools. That's the only thing we're asking for from them. I have talked with both the city of Brainerd and Baxter, city administrators, and they seem interested in that. Of course, that will be up to their respective councils as well.
so Commissioner Hoag, just to follow up with you, I'm trying to get a consensus of what the limit that you want to be on this application for nonprofits. Bill said he's okay with 10,000, Rosemary said 10,000, what are you?
Well, it sounds like 10,000's a fair number.
Okay.
And
Steve?
Oops, sorry.
Go ahead.
And I do want to make sure that if we don't get applicants, because we don't know, we didn't get as many applicants for the taxes as we thought we would, that we can come back and if we have additional money, we could come back and give some of these others more money.
So,
If we can get
So
this-
I don't want to say, oh, they can't have this amount. Maybe they'll end up getting that amount, but I just wanted to make sure everyone had the opportunity to apply.
If we can get your approval tomorrow, then in my mind, we probably could have the open application period be mid-August to mid-September. And I want to try to pull that as early as possible so that we have time after your review process, if indeed that's the case. I'm not expecting that to be the case. We will also continue to advertise during that open application period until we know we have gotten at least as many applications that we have funding for. So but if we hit the number, then we probably won't continue to advertise.
so just to expand on that, okay, so let's just say hypothetically, we get applications and I don't know, let's say we thought there was gonna be more applications for the tax to extend the taxes. Okay, so we didn't get very many. Let's say we don't get very many, which I don't think is gonna happen. I think there'll be a lot of applications. Let's say the applications come in and we only have applications totaling $500,000. At that time, couldn't the county board authorize that the applications that we have, if they want to bump it up to 20 or 30 or 40,000, we could authorize that at that time, correct?
You could also consider, we've had a 50-employee limit. Well, you might then entertain applications for between 50 and 100, 50 and 75. You got a variety of different ways in which you can do this. The other thing I would point out is, we still have set aside the $1 million contingency. And so depending on how many applications you get, we may also choose to divert some resources from that contingency into any of these purposes.
Yeah. Steve, what do you think?
10,000, I'm comfortable with the 10,000.
Okay, so I think we've got consensus. Tim, do you need any more?
No.
Huh?
We'll bring you completed applications tomorrow for your review, and we will bring you the 2 broadband projects. If Steve is still on the line and has any information for us on
He
the County
does.
Road 13.
Steve's got it figured out, I guess. Steve, are you, so we're done on this application then? You got enough information? All right. Steve, are you there?
I am here.
Yes. What did you come up with?
We're looking at a total project cost of $184,000.
I couldn't hear
And that
you.
would be building from our existing facility at the intersection of County Roads 3 and 4, north along 4, to connect the Lake Edward Town Hall.
184.
What did he say?
It
184.
passes 64 establishments total.
Where did you figure out from?
From where we currently have our facility at the intersection of County Road 3 and 4 by the Y store there, going north along 4 to the Lake Edward Town Hall.
What I was asking for was from where the cable is now, or where the broadband is now on County Road 13. I know it extends from the 371 end as far down as MSP power lines go, but then from there to County Road 4. That's what I was asking for. That doesn't sound like.
No, that wouldn't be included in this part. No. I thought we were just talking about getting to the Lake Edward Town Hall.
No, what we're looking for, Steve, is connection from where broadband ends. I believe Charter supplies broadband to the west. CenturyLink, I believe, does not supply high speed. So along the County Road 13 corridor from where Charter ends, all the way to the Lake Edward Town Hall at the corner of 13 and 4.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about another mile in, I believe, where there's no service.
That's the one that we're interested in. So why don't you work on that one and send us that if you can by the end of the day? And then I'll bring the number
So it'll
forward.
be that total I just gave you plus some then.
I can't hear anything he's saying.
Yeah, and
Can you hear me?
What did he say?
It would be more than the 184.
Okay.
It would be the 184 plus one.
is it necessary to put that portion in to do the portion that I had suggested?
It is.
Okay.
So I'll talk with Christie and Steve afterwards. We will bring you a number, regardless of what the number
Tomorrow.
is. We will bring you a number.
Okay,
Thank
Okay.
you.
And is it deliverable?
And is it
That timeframe.
deliverable? Yep.
deliverable.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
the big thing.
Okay. So, just looking here. Anything else? No? Okay. All right, I guess if there's nothing else, we'll be, anything else from the county board? Bill?
Nope.
Okay, we're adjourned then.
Thank you.